welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello everyone, welcome to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jenn, and I am joined by the creator of an absolutely delightful new graphic novel. I fell in love with every single character and every single drawing, and I am so excited to talk about this book. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, thanks for having me. My name is Lisa Naffziger. I just finished a graphic novel called DEJA Speaks to Freaks, which is about a girl going and interviewing monsters and urban legends over the course of her summer vacation.
I fell in love with DEJA right away and her whole family. Like they are so well crafted and they are so lovable. Before we get too much into that book, I would love if you could tell us a little bit about your career and your journey to this book. I know that your first book, Minus, was with Iron Circus, which I am a huge fan of as well. So yeah, could you tell us about how you got here?
Yeah, sure. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design, and that sequential program definitely launched me into the direction of comics. Originally, I was interested in animation, but when I went to college, I found that a lot of 2D animation was being dissolved, or like the programs were shifted more to like, we're going to model stuff in Maya, and I still wanted to draw primarily. So I thought I would try out the comics major just so I could like do more drawing related, like, oh, maybe I'll do storyboards for animation instead. But then I ended up loving comics way more and I stuck with it. And after I graduated, I did a webcomic that helped springboard me into getting connected with teaming up with a couple authors for their projects. I've done some children's books and illustrations for people's graphic novels, but yeah, my debut graphic novel was Minus with Iron Circus, and yeah, I feel like I've climbed up the mountain again, doing it all over with DEJA. So yeah, comics are fun. I love that you can do so much of it by yourself. Like it's I don't know. I feel bad whenever I'm like, oh, I don't really like group work. I like to do things by myself. But it is kind of cool to like start to finish do something all in-house other than the printing and distribution, which I'm very grateful to Top Shelf for doing that for me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I totally get what you mean. Like you have ownership like almost over the complete process when you are illustrating your own work. And I love to hear when people start with web comics because I've always felt like it is such a good boot camp just for like leveling up your skill and for like creating and meeting deadlines and stuff like that. Like it's a really fast like professionalization process.
I think that webcomics, they, for me at least, helped me interact with people and get feedback in real time instead of doing like a traditionally published graphic novel where you're talking to a couple editors here and there, but it's mostly like the lone journey and not getting feedback or having people even see it until the end. So webcomics are cool that you can like have people engage with it and they're like excited and anticipating the next thing. Or sometimes when they let you know something that they've noticed that maybe you want to change later. So yeah, webcomics are a little bit different, but yeah, it's a great way to start.
Cool. Yeah, so before we get into the book itself too, you start with a very interesting dedication. You dedicate it to your parents, and you mentioned the fact that you thought that they were off starring in the X-Files, which I thought was fascinating. I myself am a lifelong X-Files fan for over half my 40 years at this point, which is terrifying. Um, could you talk about that dedication, your own relationship to the X-Files, and yeah, how your parents work into that?
I love the X-Files. I watched it maybe a little too young. My dad is mostly to blame for that one. But yeah, both of them, I wish I could like put up a picture right now so we could do a comparison. I really thought that they both had like this Dana Scully Mulder vibe to them, very 90s professional. Yeah, they they let me watch the X-Files maybe a little too young. My mom was like, "Oh, I think it's scaring Lisa." Maybe like convincing my dad, if you're gonna watch it when it's on, just watch it by yourself. Or like we had this little tube TV that he could plug headphones into, which that didn't do any good because I could still see the visuals. So I'm like sitting at the kitchen table watching over his shoulder. I can't hear anything, but I can still see the creepy stuff happening. So it was very very engaging. I couldn't look away.
That's great. And it seems very foundational because this is a story about cryptids, and that is a show that featured a lot of cryptids. So yeah, let's get to this book. It is so much fun. And I love that DEJA Ross, I feel like she resembles me in a lot of ways when I was that same age. I was so into the paranormal, the supernatural, and I was so into this just like idea of a hidden world sort of under the surface of everything normal. So could you talk a little bit about crafting her, how she came to be? And maybe crafting the dynamic with her brother, Amari, who's also like a really great character.
I think when you're doing a story with like some sort of supernatural stuff or fantasy or something outside of the real world, there is inevitably going to be a skeptic character. And I thought I, since I have a younger protagonist, I want somebody to still like engage with her and question her, but not in a way that's going to be really discouraging to her, or like it would be so easy to have it be an authority figure and then just shut this down completely, like, oh, I'm one of your parents or a teacher who's not gonna or is gonna discourage your interest in this. So I feel like there's kind of this like playful antagonism with her older brother a little bit, coming from a place of like, oh, that's my weird sister, but uh he's open enough or cares about her enough at the end to connect with her more with this, and then also realize that she was right all along and the monsters are real. So it was an easier switch for that. But yeah, I think DEJA is living my dream. I would love to spend summer vacation meeting monsters and being their friends. I think I've always wanted to do that ever since I saw Pokemon as a kid, and I thought, oh, that would be the coolest thing. Not only do you like meet all these creatures out in the wild, they can be like your companions and your friends, and they'll have different characteristics and personalities, and there are so many of them. Like I just in my cryptid research found that there are more than 50 in just the United States. There are tons and tons. So yeah, like you gotta catch them all, you gotta collect them all.
They should make a map, like they used to make with like the quarters, like a cryptid.
Yes, I've been working on one. So I've been drawing as people have given their suggestions about, oh, this one belongs to my state and you can find this one over here. I've been taking some notes and posting them. So I plan on having like an actual map soon with each of them in their place.
Oh, yes, I love that. Okay, well, I will kickstart or pre-order whatever whatever has to happen. Yes. Yeah, so let's talk about this road trip that DEJA finds herself on. She's traveling with her family. And we begin our story in Texas. The first cryptid that she meets is one of my personal favorites and also the subject of one of my favorite X-Files. It's a really sort of tawdry telenovela take on the chupacabra. That's a lot of fun. The X-Files anyway. Your chupacabra is a little different, but he fits the classic mold of the chupacabra. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how you chose your cryptids. And what kind of research you did for shaping them, because I feel like they are very uniquely yours and how they look, yet they also like engage in sort of like the classic elements of how we imagine these creatures.
Mm-hmm. When I was looking at a map or keeping track of where different cryptids were, I was trying to find maybe a collection of them that would be different enough from each other, but interesting to engage with one by one, that would make sense for a road trip. So I picked like that little south part of the United States. And I mean, the chupacabra has always been a favorite of mine, so that was a fun starting point. I also think choosing the Texas chupacabra, that would have worked well with the believability of like it's going to be small enough that he could like stow away in the trailer of their RV. If it was like Sasquatch or something a lot bigger, or one of the lake monsters, then that's not going to be as portable. So it seemed like, oh, if he's kind of around the size of a dog, he could travel with them or go under the radar. So he was my starting point. But then I thought, oh, if I always have a cryptid that's either going to be like scary or you're worried you're going to be eaten by them every time, I got to mix it up a bit. So I kind of wanted, oh, what if I did the opposite, where there's like this larger than life vision of like the Lake Worth monster, who's supposed to be this big scary ram guy, but spoiler, when you guys look at it in the book, he doesn't look like that. He's a little more little cute, a little more portable. So I thought I could do different personalities, or like thinking of the engagements that she would have and what cryptid could mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really nice structure, to sort of like have the legend encounter like the reality of the cryptid where he or she or they get to tell their own story. There's a nice little lesson in there about like not making assumptions and letting people speak for themselves. But there's a lot of like interesting sort of environmentalist messages too, because the creatures often talk about, how human activities impact their landscapes and stuff like that. So yeah, could you talk about like sort of the themes that you chose and how that all works into, the bigger project?
Ooh, good question. I'm thinking now that some of the like, oh, these are creatures, they've already existed here, they're living their lives, and humans are kind of just something that they tolerate or are a consequence of being in the world. That is something I find out in a lot of Godzilla movies, which I'm also a big fan of. I love kaiju and Godzilla and all things in that realm too. And I know Godzilla is often presented as like he's a kind of a neutral, like sometimes he's shown as like a villain or an allegory for like nuclear war, but then I think how sometimes he's presented as like a steward of the earth. So like, oh, if he's this being that's already here and humans are just kind of like a byproduct or they're just there. He's got his own agenda and he kind of has to deal with what what they're up to also. So I thought, oh, maybe the monsters just want to go about their day. I like the idea that maybe they all know each other, and they're in network with one another. They don't always get along, but the way that humans have been interested in them, but then also maybe got too zealous and tried to exploit them, kind of like in referencing other stuff like King Kong, like the first reaction to seeing like, oh, there's this cool giant ape. We want to like make him like a theme park attraction essentially. So I feel like the same kind of thing would happen to cryptids too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there is like a whole genre of monster movie or monster story that has tremendous sympathy for the monster. Yeah.
Hmm.
And this fits in very nicely there. But I like the way that it also, because it has the road trip format, gets to spotlight the different like physical landscapes of America that because there are just so many different climates and so many different looks and sort of like every state has its own feel. So it's a really lovely structure for not only exploring like the mythology, but also like the country as a whole. In terms of choosing the sort of like South as your location, did you consider any other routes, or do you think that like is this a story that you think you will continue and you will maybe explore some other like regional monsters?
Yeah, I would love to. I think another intention that I had was to purposely not bring all the heavy hitters as far as like people's favorite cryptids. For instance, I know Mothman, I'm there with all of you, but he's a huge favorite of everybody's. And I thought, oh, if this builds enough interest, would that be something that's a great setup for a sequel? Can she go over to West Virginia next and meet Mothman, and some of these other ones that people would be looking forward to? So yeah, I some of that is a little calculated, I have to admit, but I like in the same way that the X-Files is kind of like serialized like monster of the week or things are contained within an episode. Sometimes I felt like this would be a story pretty well suited to that, whether it be a road trip or a field trip. I'm trying to think of other ways that she would be going to different parts of the United States while she's as young as she is. Or maybe there's a time skip and she'll be a bit older and she has a car this time.
Ooh, yes. Yeah, it's really a lot of fun, and there are so many possibilities for exploring parts of the country and different creatures. I love how some of the designs incorporate real animals that like I may or may not exist anymore. I was particularly fascinated by the chupacabra's design and how you bring in sort of the thylacine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there other animals, extinct or otherwise, that you referenced in crafting your monsters?
The chupacabra is the main one for this story. I've been looking into other ones where people have debated, is something a cryptid if it is an extinct animal, or is it only something where its existence was ever debated in the first place? I think that's super interesting. Yeah, I guess there's this whole theory that the chupacabra sightings have been like, oh, they are thylacines or Tasmanian tigers, that they haven't totally been wiped out. Maybe there are some of them there after all, or like they were preserved in a lab, like Jurassic Park style, something like that. Or the other theory was that they were like wild dogs with mange. So I think that's another integral angle for cryptids, is some of them maybe are just like somebody saw something weird and we can't tell you what it is, or there's a weird picture that we're trying to decipher, but sometimes people are just like, oh, we thought this thing was dead and it's still out there somewhere. Maybe there's still hope. Every time there's something in the ocean that people are like, oh, I'm sure that went extinct like millions of years ago, and then it floats up on shore and they're like, oh, okay. Stuff like that gets me excited. So it could be other cryptids have that same kind of origin story.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, I do really love the sort of when we can make those connections, because I think that these cryptids are also folklore, and so it's fun to imagine like the tiny kernel of truth, that then like sprouts and grows and expands over the generations as the story is just like told and gets exaggerated. Which is like, it's a really interesting insight, I think, into like early American culture too, about like the
Mm-hmm.
dangers that like, early settlers faced and stuff like that. And even just the fear of what is in the woods just makes you imagine a lot of monsters.
Right. It shows that people will have like a different regard for each of the creatures too. Like some of them are definitely like, we were attacked. We didn't see what it was, but only partially through the bushes. So now we're really frightened. We want to hunt it down. And then there are some of others that they do have like a spiritual context or some kind of reverence for a creature, or it is integrated in folklore or spirituality. And I think that's cool too. So yeah, they're not all just scary gorilla monster Sasquatch people in the woods, even though there are a ton of them. I think it's cool that there are like genres of cryptids too. Like it does seem like every state has its own kind of Bigfoot, or every state has its own kind of lake monster, dinosaur thing. So makes you wonder that if there are enough of the same kinds of things being seen, are they really out there?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really fun to it speaks to, I think, the sort of like that maybe core of childhood that we sort of hold on to as adults, that like these things for me anyway remain tremendously interesting, and I do get very excited when we get those little news snippets.
Mhm.
So is Mothman your favorite? Is that your favorite cryptid, or do you have another?
He's one of them. Such a cool, like an icon. I just think of how easily recognizable he is, even from a design standpoint. So points for that. But one that has such an interesting backstory that I just learned about was called the squonk. Have you heard about it? It's in Pennsylvania. It's this weird like pig or wrinkly creature that it's so sad that it thinks it's so ugly that it runs around crying and trying not to be seen. And that's just so sad and so interesting to me.
Yeah, they truly are not all scary, aggressive creatures. This is this little guy needs therapy, it sounds like.
That would be one that I would want to reach out for, like
Yeah.
to be like, hey, it's okay, buddy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm always hoping to find one of the lake monsters. I love dinosaurs very much too, so I'm always hoping that there are some that are still out there and they're not totally extinct.
Absolutely. Yeah, Nessie was my favorite as a kid, and I think it's
Mhm.
really did just I wanted sea monsters to exist. So cool. Well, this is a fantastic book, and I've had so much fun talking about it with you. What is next for you? I know that, it can be hard for creators to talk about what's in process or what hasn't been announced, but what is on your horizon?
I was really fortunate that when I pitched this story to Top Shelf, they were also interested in another script that I had. That's the one benefit I think of sending out pitch packets, getting a couple of rejections in a row, is that you still have some stuff laying around that's just ready to go. So this was another webcomic that I had a couple years ago, like a kaiju themed. I mentioned Godzilla earlier. So yeah, this is my giant monster story. But I had pitched it around a couple of times and not seen a ton of traction outside of just online. So, I mean, it's good to have just like a peer-to-peer audience, but I was like, I'd really like it to be a traditionally published book if I could. So since I already had the materials, I reached out to Chris Staros at Top Shelf again to see if maybe they'd be interested, and they were. So I am hard at work on that right now.
I can't wait to read that. Yeah, and I really love the work that Chris Staros is doing at Top Shelf and the whole Top Shelf team. They published a book by me and my co-writer / artist back in 2020. So I love to, champion their work, and they keep publishing awesome people like you. So
Oh, thanks. Yeah, they're awesome. I'm so glad that I got connected with them and that they took a chance on me. So that's great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really lovely, and I can't wait for our patrons to read this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, listeners, that you've heard that's your turn now. Please pick up Deja Ross Speaks to Freaks. It is so adorable, so beautiful. The drawings are just going to really warm your heart, like make you melt. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.